Hey guys, welcome to the Secret Squirrels. We are in association with Jerome Corsi and CorsiNation.com, and we're here to enlighten and entertain you. Tonight's show is going to be centered around a book, and we're going to give you a quick peek on that. The book is called The Flourishing of Islamic Reformism in Iran, and the subtitle is Political Islamic Groups in Iran from 1941 to 1961. And the author is Saeed Mohammed Ali Tagavi. And I'm going to be thoroughly butchering a lot of Arabic names tonight, so please excuse. I don't mean to do it. I don't mean any disrespect. I just don't have any clue as to how I'm supposed to pronounce this stuff. We'll do our best to get through some of that, but firstly, let's go to our little map. We still don't have our good map, the Norse map, back yet. So
really?
So yeah, they've been down a couple days.
That's starting to work. They have done that before in the past, so don't count them out. So they must really be under some serious attack.
Yeah, I don't know, but I really would like to know what's going on in the world, and I feel like without my Norse map, I can't really see it. Even though I don't necessarily know how to interpret it, at least I like feeling like I know what's going on there, sort of, kind of. I can watch something and make it feel like I'm watching the weather or something.
We'll have to write them a little note.
Yeah.
It's like your lava lamp from the 70s, isn't it?
Well, sort of. Well, you mean the one that we're using now, or? Yeah. See, it doesn't tell you like where in these places. Like they got one dot for Russia and one dot for the United States. When the other map tells you like which cities it's going to hit, and
it tells you the company.
Yeah, so it's a lot more detailed. The other one, the Norse map. This one's just like blah, so generic. But
well, I'll write them a letter.
Maybe you could find us another one. Are there any other ones that would?
Yeah, but they're even worse than that one.
Really? That's so sad. Well,
I really like Norse corpse map.
So I'm gonna ask all of you a question, and I don't expect you to have any preformed answers on this. I want to just tell me what you think. What do you think is the answer to this question? Whatever comes to mind, start this conversation. What is the purpose of thinking? Anyone?
Really? You're going to ask me what the purpose of thinking is at this time of night?
Yes.
Survival instinct.
Survival instinct.
Mm-hmm.
You got to elaborate on that.
Well, I'm thinking right now, how am I going to get out of this response that I just made?
Okay.
Good one.
You're walking brainless through the forest and you see an animal that you don't recognize and you have to assess it. And that's thinking, depending on if you're talking about thinking or life contemplation where you're reflecting on experience and trying to make a lesson out of it.
Well, yeah, and there's going to be some variation between different kinds of thinking or different, there's different situations you find yourself in. And I'm looking for a generalized answer to, what do all these different situations have in common? What is the point of all this stuff? And I think a related question would be, what's the nature of a good conversation?
Being able to listen and comprehend what the other person's saying without taking offense.
To what end?
Connection.
Connection of what?
I think people all want to belong. And people want to be under the same tent and I don't know. I had this bizarre theory that God split everybody up, gave a little piece of him and put it into bodies. So all of you guys carry your soul, which means that I think innately we all want to try to unite again somehow. And that's why you get people that follow into clubs, into organizations. People basically want to belong. And that's why advertising works.
Right. So I think you've got a little bit of connection problem there, Bandit.
All right, can you hear me now?
There, yeah.
All right. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to clean my bathroom at the same time as the show's going on right now.
In your truck?
No, I don't have a bathroom in my truck. That's the side of the road. That's called squirting the dirt or
oh my goodness,
cooling your tires.
Yeah, I didn't know tires needed a coolant system.
Yeah, well, that's what that's what you got to do is you got to cool your tires every once in a while. No, I think that conversation is to convey information. I mean, I know that's not as romantic as Patriot 3's answer, but we all have to interact as human beings. We cannot go through life totally solo. It's just impossible.
Well, I don't know that there's really a right answer to these questions I'm asking you. It's just like,
I'm right.
Well, okay. Well, but I'm trying to stimulate the juices. I think it requires a bit of creativity. It requires a little bit of imagination. And when you start asking these questions, like who would you ask to figure out the answers to those kind of questions? What's the nature of a stimulating conversation, or what's the purpose of thinking? Those questions are they subjective? Not exactly. I don't think they're subjective precisely. I just don't know if there's any standards that how do you get out the ruler and figure out what the right answer to this kind of thing is? So, anyway, but I think maybe, what's the difference really between those two questions? If I'm having a conversation with somebody else, especially a stimulating conversation, then it is like an exchange of these vital juices, getting the creative juices or whatever. But like thinking, in a way, to me, kind of seems like you're talking to yourself. That you're having a stimulating conversation with yourself. You need
to get out more. They're bandit, or not bandit, brainwashed. That's what I was just going to call
brainwashed.
you.
I'm brainwashed. And that's probably true. So, what is that? That's kind of thing too, because brainwashed is really like the absence of thinking, right? It's like when you don't think.
It's just the total acceptance of whatever somebody else.
Yeah, you accept what somebody else tells you. You don't have to think for yourself.
Without the critical thinking, without critically analyzing it.
Human autopilot.
Yeah, see, now there's that phrase coming back. You kind of used it, but it's like critical thinking. So many people are, especially teachers, they're guilty of using this phrase, critical thinking. And what exactly does that mean, critical thinking? Well, what is thinking, for that matter? Because critical thinking, in a way, it could be interpreted just to mean like being skeptical of what somebody's telling you. So maybe you're just going to say, well, I'm going to look for different holes in your argument and try to figure out ways to resist what you're saying.
I think thinking is analyzing the information and processing it in a way that you can use it.
Decisions made based on hypothesis.
So we got lots of different possibilities here.
I got an example.
Go ahead.
I got an example. Like I was saying earlier, if you're on a trip, when you were talking about talking and having a conversation with somebody, I always am trying to look for the practical in a conversation. What can I take from this that's going to improve my life or clarify things in my life?
All right.
And that's what makes it stimulating to me, is because I come at it from a practical point of view. So if I'm coming out of a hike into a meadow, I tell some of my friends this. I say, if you see an animal that you don't recognize, right away you look at it, you assess it, and then you use your instinct. And so, unless you have knowledge. And so if it smiles at you and its teeth are pointy, you realize instinctually that's made for aggression, and I'm going to back away. If it smiles and it's got a beautiful, flat, looks like they've been to the orthodontist, you go up and you want to pet it.
Same thing. L is saying run.
Right. Same thing like if you're out in the ocean and you see a fin come out of the ocean, you see a rounded fin, curves are friendly, points are aggressive. And that stuff you learn with time, and you can make that critical thought.
So I'm going to throw something else at you guys. And this is like, I pose these first questions. I pose these questions not because I'm looking for an answer, but because I want to activate certain parts of your brain, perhaps, that maybe certain juices are flowing now. So I'm creating a certain context, setting the lights, putting on the fireplace, The
ambiance.
Yeah, see? Now, in 1976, there's this guy by the name of Richard Dawkins. Right? He writes this book called The Selfish Gene. And in this book, he he's trying to formulate a good criticism of the standard model of Darwinian theory. So that's biological evolution, like why, how does it happen? Why does it happen? Those kinds of things. And he's trying to argue that the typical Darwinian theory doesn't account for behaviors such as altruism. You know, because how does that benefit the individual member of the species if you're going to sacrifice your life for the benefit of your crowd, your tribe or whatever? And so he says, well, and that's where the second half of the book comes into play. The answer is that it's the selfish gene is the name of the book, and the point of the whole book is in the title, is that you explain evolution not at the level of the organism, but at the level of the genetic material itself. Because if you're in a tribe and you have altruistic behavior, then you actually are benefiting the gene pool.
Yes, absolutely.
So you see how that makes sense, right? It's a neato theory because of that. But then the second half of this book, he's like, but we're in a situation now, and now meaning the past 100,000 years, so it's kind of relative, but we have developed language. So biology, and this is all from within a scientific materialism point of view, biology has found a way to evolve past itself. So now that we don't have to adapt to our environment on a genetic level, now we can adapt on a cultural level. And the word that he uses, so it's a corollary to the gene, is the meme. And now we have memes all over the internet. But nobody knows where that word came from. Meme, what's a meme? Well, that's what it is. It's a thought form. It's something that, like a gene, replicates and adapts. And it's the same thing. It's like an idea that helps you make sense of your experience. So, so the combination of like a picture and a set of words is there because it reminds you of a certain experience you've had. So it's pointing to that part of your experience. It's, it's directing you to a specific part of the experience, and the words help you interpret it. Right? So my claim here is that the purpose of thinking is to help us make sense of our experience. Period.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I agree.
And so this is why there's a very big difference between, if you're in high school and you're sitting there bored out of your mind because the teacher's yabbing, yab, and they're telling you what to think, right? And so all you got to do to pass high school is just regurgitate that information. You put it down on the test, you write your essay or whatever, it's done. But then once you go to college, the difference is now you have to actually think.
Some colleges,
not necessarily.
Yeah.
Well, ideally,
throw something, Brian. I'm going to throw something at you about critical thinking. This is a little whatever pet peeve of mine is trivia night. Okay, trivia nights. I used to enjoy trivia nights until I figured out that most of them is memorization.
Yeah.
Most of them is absolutely, do you remember this movie from 1956? Do you remember this from high school? Do you remember this? Okay, that's what it is. Now, I always said I liked the ones that had riddles in them or had math problems in them, or those to me are critical thinking.
Well, just thinking.
Not just,
we don't have to use the word critical because it's just thinking. It's just like, can you?
Okay. Right. Don't make me use that muscle between my ears. It hurts.
Yeah. So, so I guess the difference here when it's this show, the Squirrels, the Secret Squirrels. We've been on our different roller coaster ride of trying to figure out where we fit in, but I kind of think that we basically need to go the exact opposite way of the direction that DC Hammer's going, because he's going to cover us. He's covering the information. It's up to date. It's all the different things. Everything's happening right now. So how do you just be aware. So it's basically factual. But the factual level, as just having information, does not mean that you understand the significance of that information. Mm-hmm. And that's where the thinking comes in. So you're given a piece of information, whether that comes from your sensory experience or from some kind of scientific thing or whatever the information is, you have to figure out what it means. And that's where the thinking comes in. We have to think about it. What does this mean? Right? How does this apply to your life?
Right. And what's going to be the consequences of this action?
Yeah, and is there any responses that I have to elicit? What do I have to do? What does it mean to me? What should I do about it? And if you're giving a bunch of information, but you don't know what to do about it, well, then it just leaves you feeling disempowered.
Hopeless.
Yeah, you're hopeless. You can't do anything. You can't. So information in itself is not necessarily useful unless you can figure out what it means and what you're supposed to do about it. But, this is just...
So you're saying that basically we're hopefully going to give people the tools to empower themselves.
Well, hopefully. I mean, the first step is just to analyze the information. What actually is going on here? What does it mean? And what is it that we need to do about it, if anything? Is it even something that we need to worry about?
Right.
Because I see this situation as we have the internet at our disposal. We have all this information at our fingertips, but very little meaning. There's information, information galore, but very little interpretation going on. We need more analysis, right?
Right.
But, anyway, I mean, I'm this is just my speculation, and that's kind of what I do. I speculate. But speculation is like a dirty word for some people. For me, it's whatever.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's you. I wish we lived closer, because you sound like the kind of guy we'd probably watch a game together with a group of buddies and then just keep talking until it got really late, and you'd leave with like, what the heck just happened tonight? What did I learn?
Well, and John L. is saying at Brainstorm, I agree. DC gave us the facts. But for example, what will happen with the 3,000 coming to our southern border? Will that help Trump, or will it help the Democrats?
Yeah, and so there's a big difference here too between like science. Mm-hmm. Well, so a lot of. And then the next question, I guess, the natural question is, well, what exactly is thinking? And there's a couple of different directions. So when you're using reason, there's a couple of different directions you can go with it. One is deductive reasoning. So that's kind of like math. Math is like you have two principles that you start with, and you put them together, and following a set of rules, you come up with a third piece of information. So you can make new deductions from old information. That's deductive reasoning. So you're, premise one, premise two, therefore conclusion. And the classic example of this is a syllogism. It says, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. It's a simple, it follows reason. That's deductive reasoning. And that's also known as rationalism, where you start thinking about how all your thoughts fit together in your head. You got this big web of belief, what you believe about the world, and you're trying to iron out all the inconsistencies there. But you got this fact, and you got this fact. Well, then, how can these two things fit together, and what does it mean? So that's where the meaning is. It's in the analysis, is in the deduction, right?
Right.
But the opposite of that is empiricism, and that is known as inductive reasoning. With inductive reasoning, you're trying to start out with a series of data sets, say. You're going out and you're conducting your scientific experiment, and so you have a series of events that you want to map onto a graph, and eventually you can turn this into a math equation, basically. But you're generalizing a set of phenomena, and you isolate that phenomena as much as you can from any sort of contingent influences on there. You're just trying to figure out what is the cause, what is the effect, right? So you're looking for some kind of rule, cause, effect. So the event of a given phenomena is located in a timeline. So you got a certain event that takes place, and there's a limited number of factors that contribute to some kind of event And once you've isolated those events and you can predict the outcome, now you've got some kind of principle, right? So now you find some kind of universal principle, then you're trying to postulate that, okay, when this set of circumstances exists, then, you know, they come together, have this kind of interaction, and then you're going to have some kind of resulting combination, or, you know what I'm saying? But there's problems with both of these forms of reasoning. With deductive reasoning, the problem is that the conclusion is only true if, first of all, both premises have to be true, and secondly, that the reason that you have used to deduce the outcome has to be sound. So true premises and a sound reasoning will lead you with true conclusions. Now, you don't always know what your initial premise, you don't always know that the initial premises are true. So that's, if somebody is engaging in deductive reasoning, that's the thing you have to look at. Are these premises, these initial premises, true, that they're actually verifiable? And those things themselves have to be verified. So, and this is where you see that empiricism and rationalism are best used together. But too oftentimes people use one or the other and they don't get very far. But think of it like your legs. You got left leg, right leg, left, right. So you use a little bit of deductive reasoning, a little bit of inductive reasoning, and pretty soon you're running. Right? That's where we're learning how to think. Are you guys still with me? Am I going on too long?
Yeah, we're here.
You're all falling asleep on me.
What? No, not asleep yet.
Oh. See, now...
Brainstorms, Bandit's trying to clean his toilet.
Yeah.
I'm onto the kitchen floor.
Well, this is my frustration. You know, I'm trying to help you make sense of your experience by looking at the very tools by which you make sense of your experience. You see, it's very meta.
That's fine, except that you had me, the whole, Corsi Nation audience today, and said we were going to be talking about this book out of Iran, and now
I'm setting up for that, man. I'm setting up for it.
All right.
You don't understand my process. You guys not, okay. So
we understand your process. We're just wondering when it's coming.
Okay. Okay. So anyway, yeah. So
I think you got to break down deductive and inductive reasoning right away.
But I'm trying to make sense of a certain part of our experience. So what is this certain part of our experience? Well, it is radical Islam. That's the thing that I'm trying to make sense of. What the heck is radical Islam? Where did it come from? Why does it exist? Why do they hate us? So there you go. So now we're thinking. It's not just a belief. We're not just going to adopt somebody's belief. We're trying to understand our own experiences, right? We're not trying to understand somebody else's experiences. So this is the first part. We're trying to actually understand our own experiences.
We are.
No, we're not. You can't understand somebody else's experiences. It's just not going to happen.
Okay, hold on here. Well, just before we go any further at this, then, we are trying to understand Muslims and Islam, and why they hate us. So that is somebody else's experience. It's not.
You don't have access to their experiences.
Well, I don't have that experience.
Right, but you don't. Well, that's why we're reading their books, because while we don't have their experiences, we do have access to their thoughts. Right? We don't have access to their experience, but we have access to their thoughts, and their thoughts are written down on the page, and that's how we can pry our way in there. And we can't, while we can't know what their experience is, we can try to understand it from our own perspective, what these thoughts mean to us.
Okay.
See?
Yes. And John L. says that he says, we're here at Brainstorm. So he's understanding what you're saying. So we're still there.
All right. I don't want to bore you. I do want it to be stimulating, but I don't know how to make it any more. To me, it's fascinating stuff, thinking about, they call it metacognition, thinking about thinking. To me, it's really interesting to think about.
It's very thoughtful.
Oh my gosh.
I only have one brain cell left, right?
I feel so.
Blow that sucker up.
I feel like I'm being picked on.
We're just teasing you, Brainstorm. I think it's amazing that you've got this going on. I was just going to ask you, your premise is that Muslim, or what did you say, extreme Muslims? Extreme Islam doesn't like
this
us.
whole series that we're working on right now, I'm going to call it political Islam. So it's and hopefully reading the stuff we're going to look at today is going to explain why that's the right name for it. Political Islam is what we should be calling this stuff.
Right.
And the short answer to that is Islam, before all this stuff happened, before the series of thoughts, there's this. So there's two things that we got to look at. We got to look at the actual historical events that took place, but we also have to understand the writings of some of these major leaders, these intellectual leaders. What did they say that actually inspired all the future reactions and the future different variations in radical Islam? And so. And the basic idea here is that you've got, Western influence on the Arab world, and they didn't like it, and they're looking for a solution. So they're thinking, and we can follow along with their thinking, and we can try to understand what they're saying.
We're doing inductive reasoning right now.
Sort of, yeah. And we are exposing ourselves to their thoughts that wouldn't have occurred to us based on our own experiences, because we didn't have these questions. We have a different set of experiences. So we're trying to understand what their reaction is to a given set of historical circumstances. And by understanding the ideas there, we can start to understand the intentions behind the ideas, if that makes sense. So it's like we're imagining being them. We can kind of be like them, but we can never really get there. We can never really know what another person is experiencing, but we can listen to what they're saying, kind of read between the lines, and approximate it,
Yeah, my whole thing is, this is interesting because inductive reasoning, as I understand it, means that we're establishing a premise thought. So the fact that these people don't like us, and then we're going to branch off and broaden our, assessment and try to figure out why that is. So we start with a specific premise, and then we go and start to try.
Well, they got very good reasons for not liking us, from what I can tell.
But yeah, when we start to go and tell everybody else in the world how to live and how they should behave, and we're going to go and take you over if you don't.
Well, we took over their oil. That's basically what happened. We took all their oil. Yeah. That's why they hate us. That's a short answer.
Well, how's that happened in the 1970s when Jimmy Carter, had us waiting around the block to try to get gas? We had to go on even an odd number of days if we controlled their oil.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones. It's Saudi Arabia that's jacking up the prices on a whim. They're the ones that can go and undercut it.
It's their own people that are doing this. It happened in Nigeria too for many, many years, where the oil was being taken by the warlords there, and was being sold off willy-nilly, and we were getting the blame for it, and it wasn't us.
So I'm pulling up the table of contents here right now, and the way that I like to think, and this is kind of this is a personal thing, it's like everybody's got to find their own style or whatever, but I definitely like the form follows function sort of cliche. But it's like, you see, like the title, go back to the title page again. The title, The Flourishing of Islamic Reformism in Iran, Political Islamic Groups in Iran, 1941 to 61. So there's the function of this book. Right? The title is the function. That's what it's trying to do, is describe a certain condition. And then you look at the form, all you have to do is turn to the contents. This is the form it takes in order to accomplish the function of achieving the goal set by the title of the book. So we got the introduction, which internally is providing this sort of explanation for the book that references itself. That's what the introduction is. It's like a mall map. The mall map has a little arrow on it that says, you are here. And the mall map is only true so long as it's bolted to the floor and nobody's moved it. Don't get any ideas, Bandit. It's not a prank. You don't get to do that. But so the mall map, that's what the introduction is. It's how you situate this text. The introduction should be telling us how this text is situated amidst all the other texts that are available for that subject. And hopefully in doing so, it's telling us as readers whether or not we're going to get anything out of it based on what we want. But this is just an ideal of what an introduction should do, from my point of view. And so there's 3 parts to this. So you go back, and so this book is divided into 3 parts: the social theists, and then you go to part 2, the Iran freedom movement. Finally, you have part 3, the Society of the Devotees of Islam. So these are 3 instances of radical Islam, different forms of political Islam, and we're going to learn through, we're going to study this stuff closely, and we're going to kind of read together and learn how to study, because the time is over when you could sit down passively on your couch and let somebody else tell you what to believe. Now you have to actually learn how to think and participate in the conversation. That's the time that we're in right now, is that you can't just listen to somebody else's point of view and accept it as your own. You have to actually develop your own point of view.
Unless you want to become a pet.
A pet?
Yeah, a pet. It seems like there's a lot of people out there. What are you, a sheep? Or what do they call it? Are you, somebody that's in captivity or somebody that's free?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And if you don't want to think and you just want to go and become one of those Apple commercials back in the early 80s where they're all just droning through in gray uniforms and bald-headed, just listening to what's been told them without thinking. If you want that, you probably want to vote Democrat this next time.
Yeah, it actually is hard work thinking. We don't necessarily give a lot of respect to academics because we envision them sitting there drinking their soy latte and don't imagine that they know what a day's work is like. But if that is so true, then it shouldn't be any problem for us to do some homework, right? But the reality is, it actually does hurt your brain to do serious thinking. It's painful if you do it right. It is.
Okay.
Well, I only have one brain cell
You're
left.
in my head right now, brainstorm.
Hey, I have a thought before we get started into the book. This just hit me, and you guys can call me crazy, or you can agree with it, or maybe we can wait till another time to come up with a definitive answer.
Okay, crazy.
But what if, because we're trying to find out why Muslims hate us, and hate's such a strong word, and we're generalizing people. We want you to know we don't feel that 100% of Muslims hate us, but the ones who do, why do they? What if it's just like America right now and corporate media? What if they've been told lies all their lives about America?
Well, that's part of it, but it's complicated. And one thing we have to get rid of right away is looking for easy answers. Stop looking for easy answers. That's like the magic pill that's going to make you feel better. We're not looking for easy answers.
This isn't an easy answer. This just
because there's many facets to that.
So
there's many facets to the reasoning and and
why
it goes on and on.
Yeah, and as we go, we're going to learn more questions. We're going to, and hopefully over time, over multiple of these kind of discussions, hopefully we'll get to the point when we start valuing the questions over the answers. That's when you know you're really learning. Because the answers, it's like that idea of empty your cup. I don't know if you've heard that, you've seen that in the Bruce Lee stuff. And there's the kind of, it's like if your cup is already full and you try to pour more liquid into it, then it's just going to overflow and you're not going to fit anything else in there. You got to empty your cup. It's a Buddhist thing, but that's what we have to do. Is we have to stop being arrogant about thinking that we know everything. Be humble in what we think we know.
I know I don't know everything.
Well, okay, but that's a good thing, because that makes it easier to learn. Because if you think you know everything, you can't learn anything else. And answers will do that to you. They'll make you think that you know something because you got the answer. You put it in quotation marks. You got the answer. So you don't have to learn anything else, right? But questions, they keep you digging. Keep digging more. You always learning more because the question keeps driving you. So just start acquiring more questions and get rid of the answers.
What is the meaning of life?
And that's a good question too. And we'll get to that in another time. Now we'll have to talk about existentialism at some point. But right now we're studying Buddhism. I mean, not Buddhism, but Islam.
That's the question you can't answer.
Join us next Monday for the meaning of life. We'll answer that for you.
You laugh. You laugh. There's a lot that common sense can do for you if you just sit in your recliner and think about it. So,
well, I do all the time.
Well,
you just got to put a headset on and listen to Pink Floyd's The Wall, and then
oh, there you go.
Will that do it?
You and I are soul brothers. I just want you to know that.
I feel you, my friend. I feel you.
All right.
So, cool. Today I'm hoping that we can get through the introduction. We spent all this time in the introduction to the introduction, making sense of why we're doing what we're doing. Where does this fit in the whole campaign within Corsi Nation? How does Corsi Nation fit in with the larger independent media and citizen journalism movement? How does that fit into the do-it-yourself movement, and how to become more empowered as an individual and be less dependent on the state and whatever other external factors? See, we have to become more. We have to realize the potential that we have within us. Having potential is not enough. You have to actualize that potential. That means you have to work for it. You have to dig in the dirt. You have to do the work. Homework. It's painful.
And that's what we're going to do?
Yes.
That sounds like us.
And just like with working out, if you're lifting weights or something like that, maybe at first it's not that fun, but you keep doing it, it becomes enjoyable. And then you kind of get high from it after a while. And I've actually come to the point where I get addicted to epiphanies, because you wrestle with stuff for long enough, and all of a sudden you go, poof. It's like, oh, I understand.
They told me that when I got my gym membership.
About epiphanies?
That I get addicted to it.
Yeah.
Have you?
No.
I think that's a great idea for Corsi Nation, though. We have to get somebody that's going to be able to incrementalize this information so that they have a source to go and find out what's the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning, pathos, ethos, logos, arguments, propaganda. A kind of index that people can have as a quick reference, but not everybody's got the time to do it. And
well, I think, I want to situate myself, in my efforts, kind of in contradistinction to what DC Hammer's doing. That DC Hammer's providing you with a bunch of information, and I'm hopefully going to provide you with some analysis. And together, you kind of do the deductive and inductive kind of combination.
Well, at least this keeps you from being a sheep and just taking everything that you're fed at face value. It gives you the chance to sit there and figure out really what's going on and have the tools available to find those answers.
It's dinner time. My wife was just calling me to go get some dinner. I got to work on her. She's a little sheepish right now.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and start reading here. And you guys, there's a link in the Discord thing if you want to follow along with the book. I'm just going to start reading, and maybe if you have the book with you, then you can take over at some point when I get tongue-tied or something. I'm scrolling here until I get to the introduction section. Here we go. So this is the intro to the book, and we're understanding political Islam. Ready? Go. The unabated factionalism within the Islamic Republic of Iran in the past decade has shown that the Islamic Revolution has two different faces, a fundamentalist face and a modernist one. The 1979 revolution was not merely a dismissive reaction to Western civilization, but was also a product of an intellectual tradition attempted at reconciling Islam with new sciences and schools of thought originating in the West, and enabling it to respond to the requirements of a modern life. What distinguishes the fundamentalists from the modernists is not so much the issue of foreign policy as the way we think about that society, politics, and religion. Whereas the fundamentalists claim that they follow Islam in its pure form, the modernists accept certain types of borrowing from other schools of thought. This affects the way that the two groups interpret Islamic teachings. Whereas the former follow a strict approach in interpreting religious scripts, the latter have a broader view that allows reliance on reasoning and new sciences when interpreting the scripts. Nevertheless, Islamic modernists and fundamentalists have one belief in common: the need for direct involvement of religion in politics. Modernist and fundamentalist approaches towards Islam have been coexisting as well as competing among religiously minded political activists in Iran at least since the mid-20th century. The 1979 Islamic Revolution was a product of the coalition of the advocates of these two approaches, under the charismatic leadership of Ayatollah Khomeini. The developments leading to the formation of fundamentalist and modernist tendencies among Islamic activists in Iran can be traced back to the all-embracing encounter of Iranian society with Western civilization, beginning in the mid-19th century. Since then, the winds of change have swept through Iran with far-reaching consequences. The process of transformation of Iranian society reached its climax in the period between constitutional revolution of 1906 and the demise of Reza Shah's reign in 1941. Rather than creating a new society, however, this process brought about a type of dualism in various spheres of society, from politics and economy to education and culture. In the political domain, while political and administrative institutions became modernized, political relationships, hierarchy, and legitimacy preserved their old forms. In the economic system, despite the establishment of new industries and the expansion of imports, the traditional subsistence economy continued to exist. In the sphere of culture, the education system was transformed and the mass media assumed importance, but the traditional institutions remained. The tension between tradition and modernity has played a significant role in political and social developments in Iran during the past 1.5 centuries. Religion, which has deeply affected every aspect of Iranian society, was a key subject of confrontation between tradition and modernity. The advocates of the new institutions and westernized circles scorned religious faith and found it the cause of the backwardness of society. They believed that since the West had achieved progress when it got rid of religion, Iranians should do the same. For the traditionalists, on the other hand, Islam was a comprehensive and perfect way of life, far from any defect. There was, however, a third group of thinkers who, while appreciating the achievements of the West, tried to come up with a new understanding of Islam, in order to enable it to deal with the requirements of the modern age. This group, among whom there was no consensus about methods and approaches, can be called Islamic reformists or Islamic modernists. Each Islamic reformist, depending on his background and in particular his education, had his own particular account of the weaknesses of the traditional approach to Islam and came up with different prescriptions for enabling Islam in the modern world. Westernized circles, traditionalists and reformists, have competed with each other in the modern history of Iran. They fought many battles, but the war is not yet over. More than 2 decades after the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran is still experiencing the confrontation between these forces, as much as it did before the 1906 Constitutional Revolution. Nevertheless, the developments of the 20th century have enormously complicated the alignment and balance of forces. Among these developments from the early 20th century to 1941, the beginning of the period under discussion in this book, were the Constitutional Revolution of 1906, the gradual exclusion of the clergy from the process of revolution, the revolution's giving way to the tyranny of Reza Shah, the modernization of various institutions by the Shah, the exclusion of the clergy from public life, the suppression and disillusionment of the intellectuals, and finally, the collapse of the modernism of Reza Shah, following the Allied powers' invasion of Iran in 1941. That was a mouthful. With the occupation of Iran by the Allies in September of 1941, which led to the exile of Reza Shah, the clash between the westernized groups, traditionalists and reformists, intensified in relatively open atmosphere, and a strong Marxist group entered into the conflict. Given the failure of the westernized elite in the first half of the 20th century, there was a new tendency toward Islamic reformism. Lay religious intellectuals established various Islamic associations, including Jamiat-e Khoda Farastani Socialist, or the Society of Socialist Theists, led by Jalal al-Din Ashtiani and Muhammad Naqshab. Anjomani Tablighat-e-Islami, or the Society for Promoting Islamic Teachings, established by Mahmoud Shahabi, Kanuni Nashri Akaye, I can't say these words, or the Center for Spreading Islamic Truth, founded by Muhammad Taqi Shariati in Mashdad. Kanuni Islam, or the Islamic Center, directed by Ayatollah Mahmoud Taleghani, and Islamic associations of students, engineers, and physicians. These associations, which were primarily founded to promote Islamic ideas, one by one, directly or indirectly, became involved in politics. In the 1940s and 50s, Islamic reformism flourished in Iran. The main feature of this new trend towards Islam was a tendency towards politicization of Islam. In other words, Islamic reformists were eager to involve Islam directly in the political struggle for changing Iranian society. In the post-September 1941 era, the main body of Shiite clergy in Iran maintained its calculated aloofness from politics, following the tradition of quietism, which characterized Shiite communities in predominantly Sunni states for centuries. A minority of the clergy, including Ayatollah Sayyid Abul Qasim Kashani, however, began active participation in politics. This group did not represent a sharp diversion from the dominant tradition. Since the establishment of the Shiite Safavid Empire in Iran, many Shiite ulama had cooperated with the government. Later on, many prominent ulama had supported the constitutional revolution of 1906, while a few of them had opposed it. Such involvement in politics did not entail an independent claim on government by the clergy. It was considered as a social part of mainly religious duties of the clergy. The establishment of Jamiyat Fadayani Islam, or the Society of the Devotees of Islam, was a turning point. The group was founded by Sayyid Mujtaba Navabi Safavi, a low-ranking militant Shiite clergy, in 1945, and was engaged in radical activities, particularly acts of assassination in the name of Islam. It introduced the concept of Islamic government. The group's politicized account of Islam was in sharp contrast with the quietism of its contemporary clerical circles. It did not attract serious attention at the time, although it inspired the next generation of Iranian clergy who participated in the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Nevertheless, it was not difficult for the advocates of political Islam and even more radical groups such as Fadayan to justify their activism by reference to Islamic teachings and particularly the Shiite doctrine. The Shiite folklore glorifies martyrdom for the cause of justice, and its history is imbued with frequent rebellions in the name of religion against oppressive ruling dynasties. However, in the historical context of the first half of the 20th century, and particularly after the premature death of the 1906 revolution, the traditional inaction and fatalism were prevalent in Iranian society. Any political action in the name of Islam was considered heresy by some religious circles. That is why, as will be seen later, many Islamic groups were reluctant to enter into politics, and it took them a long time to take on board the legitimacy of political action in the name of religion. Okay, let's take a minute to think about that. What have we learned? Anybody still here with me?
Yeah, we're here.
Are you sleeping now? Are you sleeping?
No, it's just a lot. He's got so much in there, and it's compacted so that history is compacted so much. But basically, what he's saying is Marxism got involved, and in my thinking, it looks like that's probably part of the problem, start of the problems that they had, is using Marxism to help reform some of their religious views. You know.
Yeah, I will honestly tell you that I liked our discussion earlier about thinking. This is very dry to me. Just very.
It is. It's very hard to follow. It really is, because it takes me about 3 or 4. It took me about 3 or 4 times to get through this, and I still don't really understand it. However, you know, and I'm not really sure why Marxism, especially when you get later on into the book where they're saying that, you know, they cherry picked Marxism and put in there. You know, it's kind of disturbing.
Well,
I don't know.
I don't want to get too far into that. I mean, that's a. If you look at the different parts, I mean, the first one is called the social theists, and that they call that because it's socialism. Basically, they're trying. It's right, and it's really not any different from liberation theology. Let me do this real quick. Okay.
Raymond Kendall Knapp says it was the golden age of terrorism, the genesis of all that was to come in the late 70s and early 80s.
Well, it's this the social theists in that part of, and remember, what we're looking at here is specifically happening in Iran, right? So there are
today
different.
Right?
Well, that was, I mean, all the stuff where it's the history of Iranian politic. You know, it's so there's something else happening in Egypt and something else happening in Saudi Arabia. So this is just very localized, right? But the thing is, like the Muslim Brotherhood has gone on to, you know, this organization has grown, right? Originally, they were just trying to do the same thing as some of these early guys in Iran. They're just trying to get rid of the Western influence. But what happens over time is there's actually a guy that was born in Egypt and raised under this Muslim Brotherhood sort of model of the world. And eventually, his ideas became adopted in the Shiite stuff. That's Iranian stuff.
Right.
But then it starts it starts breeding, I guess, across those usual, I mean, the traditional boundaries between Sunni and Shia, I think, is not necessarily so strict when we're talking about the radical forms. The radical Islam, the political Islam, it has more cross-fertilization. Put it like, you know what I'm saying? Than
so it's easier to hybrid those two.
Yeah, it's
into
just
something else completely.
But in order to like make sense of this relative to our own situation, more American stuff. I mean, we are Christian by and large in the United States, but we do have this liberation theology that we have to contend with here, and it's the same thing effectively as what they're dealing with there. The social theists in Islam. This liberation theology is trying to merge together Catholicism specifically. It's not just Christian theology, it's Catholicism and Marxism. And so it's really hard to do that, because Marxism, you know, it says, you know, religion is the opiate of the masses. It's you know, avowedly atheist. So how do you take this avowedly atheist position and mix it in with your theology?
Right.
But if you look at it just as in terms of like your concept of social justice, you know, Marxism is like how you want to apply your, you know, action in the world, whereas your theology is more about your internal relationship to God. You know, then I think it is possible. But as we're going to learn more throughout this book, I see part of their problem is actually that. Let me get back to you in a minute. There's a later on, and I suppose we're skipping ahead, but where does it go? Yeah, I think it's the very last one in here, part 3, the Society of Devotees of Islam. So it's part 3, chapter 10, and it's called Criticizing Muslim Clergy for the Separation of Religion and Politics. I think that in itself is the key to this whole mess. And I'm looking forward to reading that, because they don't make a distinction between the public and private spheres. Yeah. Right. And that's why
what gets
all these
them into trouble.
Right. And that's why because they don't make a distinction between the public and the private, then it's their religious orientation, their political orientation ends up being the same thing. And so they envision a one world government under Allah. Right. And that means Sharia law for everybody. And it's a convert or die situation. So.
Well, and I think that's why specifically that our founding fathers put in our documents that there has to be a separation of church and state, which is getting perverted as time goes on. But
well, there's some practical problems in there. I mean, when it comes time to like, okay, so say we do believe in a separation of church and state, and precisely where is that line? You know, if you've got a set of values that you live your own life in a certain way, these are my religious values, but then you want to participate in your government and you want to create a certain sort of society, are you not voting for the values that you hold in your personal life? How do you practically separate religion and politics? I mean, it's nice as an idea, but is it even possible, really? Or what does it mean?
Well, I think it's a possibility. I think that what you have to consider in doing that is that you've got people of all different religions here, and how do you pass law that's not going to cause problems for the majority? And I think that's the key, is looking at the majority of people. You know, if this was Saudi Arabia, there's certainly laws that we would pass there that would never pass here, and vice versa, because of the majority of the religion in these countries.
Well, you take either of these words, religion or politics, either of those words is a pretty loosey-goosey word, you know.
Right.
And like when you study in an academic environment, you have to define the parameters of your study. You have to define the parameters of your discipline. You're in religious studies, you have to know what things count as religion and what things don't. You know, and the same with politics. You have to know exactly what that is. How do you do that? That's the challenge, right?
Way.
And then once you try to figure out what each of those things are individually, then what is it to mean that they're separate or together? And that's the kind of thing that actually helps us learn how to think. We're asking these questions, trying to figure out what, you know, we're wrestling with these things. We're juggling different concepts. We're, you know, how do I account for my own subjectivity, that I have certain associations with those words? I mean, what are the, you know, am I supposed to use those words the way that everybody uses those words, and everybody uses them differently? So what is that supposed to, you know, it's a challenge.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's an answer for that.
I don't know if there's an answer for anything personally, but
on that.
And that's why I think nationalism has become such a big thing in the United States and around the world, is because people are getting so confused, and they realize they only have such a short life to live, and they want to have direction, and they want to belong to the clan, but the clan keeps getting dispersed and confused.
More
and more complicated, less and less. There's no sense. You can't make any sense of it.
You can't. Right. And who wants to live in confusion? I want to be able, I mean, 80% of this country still believes in Christianity in some form. Yeah. And I would argue that every atheist I've ever met started out as a Christian. So basically they're still living with Christian moral code, even though they don't want to celebrate God. And so we still kind of are on the same page. But when you get some of these extremists that are going up and throwing all these questionable things out in the mainstream media, and they use propaganda tactics, repeating the same thing over and over again, it starts to get people confused.
Well, and it starts making it difficult for anything to be done, because we have to pacify this minority, this really tiny minority.
Right. And in a true democracy,
we can't do that. We can't do that.
Democracy, they get overruled, and that's it, and they move on.
That's right. And they don't want that anymore. But they don't want that.
No,
they use terrorist tactics to get their way.
Right.
I don't think it's a matter of them not wanting it. I think it's a matter of it's all on purpose. This is all on purpose.
Some of these ideas are
the deep state, the leftists are doing this to try and divide us. They couldn't divide us. They couldn't divide us by color alone. They tried to do that for years.
Right.
And we started to just blow it off. We started getting along. We weren't having racial problems.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, racial problems were getting less and less. They were still there. I'm not going to say they were gone completely, but they were less and less and less every year.
Mm-hmm.
And then along comes Obama, and along comes the deep state. And that's when,
even 9/11. Even 9/11 saying, oh, Islam is a religion of peace, but yet they blame that on Islam, and those are such contradictory terms. How are we supposed to justify that? How are we supposed to come to grips with that?
Yeah,
you know?
I do think it's all about tearing us apart. This isn't a certain minority. Oh, hey, we're hearing from that minority.
Loose the hound.
That's not.
It sounds like they're going to start singing.
Please.
It sounds like they're going to start singing Christmas carols.
Well, part of the advantage of studying this stuff more deeply is that you understand for yourself more what's at stake, and you understand yourself what you feel about it. You know, what is it how does this affect you personally? And then you're less, when you understand yourself, what's going on and what you're thinking about it, feeling about it, and all that stuff, then you're not so intimidated when somebody comes along and throws their opinions at you. It's like, right. Okay, well, great for you. You think that way.
You've got something to rebuke their idiotic reasoning with, or their parroted reasoning.
But I don't know if that's the goal. I mean, at least for myself, when I encounter people that I don't agree with, I'm not trying to prove them wrong. I feel like if I can enter into a constructive conversation with them, then I can learn from them and they can learn from me. But that's kind of what I require in a conversation, is that we are learning from each other. Otherwise, it's not really a conversation.
But that's the problem. They don't. Right. You have to want to learn from someone else. And what we're facing with a lot of these people, a lot of Islam followers included, as well as a lot of people here in our own United States, they don't want to listen. It doesn't matter if you make sense. It doesn't matter if you're
yeah, you can't make somebody have a conversation with you.
They don't want to hear it. They don't want to.
What are you going to do? You got to hold them down and say, "Listen to me."
And I think that's the problem that we're facing, is we've got so many people that are so blind to what the truth is they just don't want to see it. It doesn't matter how.
Well, I don't know what the truth is. I don't. I'm trying to figure it out, but I don't know already.
But we're willing to learn.
Yeah,
I think that these people, a lot of these people are not.
My claim all along has been, it's like, stop thinking that you already know everything. Start being a little more humble with what you think you know, and start having conversations with people that have a different point of view. Maybe you can learn from each other, and maybe it'll even expand your horizons. You'll become more of a person capable of having a better, wider experience. Hey, right?
I think if you're an intelligent person, you go into it with that attitude. But how many times do you start a conversation with somebody and they right away want to prove that they're right and you're wrong?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
wrong.
I agree.
So why do people do that?
Getting along to get along.
But why do they do it?
They don't want to.
You're right.
They don't want to. They don't want to go down that path that they may have to take the time and actually learn about something. I think it's laziness in a lot of cases.
Laziness, yes. It's not that they don't want to learn something. It's that they don't want to have to think about it. Thinking is hard. I don't want to think. Either you think my way or I'm going to fight you.
I don't think it's laziness, because I subscribed to that attitude back in the day. When you're in college and you're worried about your future and you're busting your tail and you're so busy, you were taught to trust the news media and to trust the people that were there, because we were brought up on John Wayne movies where you always see the person doing the right thing and they win in the end. So you just trust that these people that are your leaders are going to do you right. And you don't have the time necessarily to go in there and do what you guys are doing now, because think about it. We've had this conversation. How many of us are retired and have nothing but time to sit here and speculate on the world and do all this stuff, whereas other kids are just trying to find their way and they haven't got a clue.
Right.
They're easy marks. That's what it is.
Well, if we don't learn how to think for ourselves and have conversations between each other, then it's inevitable that we're going to end up in some kind of physical conflict. And in order to stop the physical conflict, then we have to accept domination by some tyrant that has our best interest, scare quotes, in mind. And if we want to be independent from tyrant, then we have to be able to communicate with our fellows. If we want to be able to communicate with our fellows, we first have to figure it out for ourselves what we want to believe about these different situations.
The greatest education you can get, I love multiculturalism because you can learn so much.
Oh, amen.
I have a student that is from Vietnam and an intelligent, really go-getter girl. And I was asking her a couple nights ago, I said, so you live in a communist state? And she says, yes. And I said, you've been able to compare both cultures. What are your thoughts? She says, communism is what we were forced to do. And she says, in America, if I can stay here, I will stay here because I'm free to do what I need to do to better myself and to be all I can be. And I said, what do you think about the fact that people your age these days are all trying to become a communist state and they're embracing socialism? She says, I don't understand. And she seemed angry.
Because they don't understand.
Heard that. I've heard that from other Vietnamese and North Koreans as well.
Eastern Bloc people. I mean, it's just one of those things where it sounds so beautiful. Oh, we're all in this together. We're all one. And that's capitalizing on the goodness of people that we're going to share. And there's not going to be anyone better than the next person until it happens.
And then what we find out is some people are more equal than others.
Right.
You know, my dad always used to say, life is not always fair.
And then Boxer goes to the glue factory.
Exactly right. But life isn't fair. Not everybody's ever going to always be equal. And that's the whole thing. And we have different we have different ways of thinking. We have different ways of seeing life. And that's what makes us unique. And communism tries to squelch that. And there's all it's doing is asking for a revolution. That is asking for a revolution.
You're here.
And in addition to the different political systems and economic theories that we have to try to reconcile, I mean, there's untold amounts of information that, I mean, look at Wikipedia or any other, I mean, the internet itself, there's so much information available, but we're suffering from information overload because we don't know what it means. We don't know how to interpret all those pieces of information and actually apply it to the way we live.
Well, not only that, but we don't know how to separate the good stuff from the bad stuff. Yeah. It's very difficult. You've got so much, right, and you've got so much to go through that you're overwhelmed with what you're looking at.
You know, common sense has it's an art that has
not so common anymore.
Right, exactly, and you know, participation trophies.
Right.
I'm going to tell you, I go back to simple things in life, and I go back to, I knew we were in trouble when you couldn't say Merry Christmas anymore. And I'm going to tell you that when they took capital punishment out of schools and they started giving participation trophies, that's when it all started going downhill, because these kids think that life is just, well, everybody wins. Everybody wins.
I can tell you the kids hate it. The kids hate it, and they're all rebelling against that.
Well, the thing is with a participation trophy, you're not encouraging anyone to think outside the box or to strive for better.
Why? Because, you know, I don't have to do much. Everybody wins. Exactly.
I have an awesome quick story for you guys.
Okay.
I had a convert. Okay, so I was teaching in the school, and I had this one Hispanic girl, and she busted her tail. She was taking a bus. Took her like 3 hours to get to school. She was supporting her family, working 2 or 3 jobs, and she was the biggest Antifa, you know, kind of girl that was screaming and yelling about socialism and it needs to happen and vote Democrat and civil rights. And, you know, civil rights is great, but it's gotten kind of ridiculous these days. We're complaining real first world problems we have here. But the thing is that she came in one day, and there were other kids that never had to work a day in their lives. Their parents dropped them off and everything. And she's turning her work in, and it was exceptional. And I looked at it and I said, your work is perfect. I said, that's 100%. I said, where are those 2 knuckleheads? The ones that, you know, that never have to work, that just showed, that are showing up right now. There they are. And she says, well, I said, let's see, do they have any work? And I said, no, they don't have, they have bad work. It's not done. They're going to both get Fs. They're going to both receive 50. And I said, so why don't you do what is right socialistically, and let's take 25 of your points from your 100 and give that kid over there that's getting a half credit, so you both get C's. Right. And she looked at me like, oh, and then she thought about it and she says, that's not right. And I said, you've been converted. And she smiled and she realized, yeah, that is pretty jacked up. But it's one of those things where if one student goes and tells another instructor there, you know, it's one of those things that I'm going to get labeled, and it's crazy. I had some instructor, what's his name? Fox One was in a class, and he was eating an In-N-Out burger. And he went into the classroom just after they had that whole boycott where the district of Southern California, they were calling for a boycott, and the Democratic Party was. He went into this instructor's classroom with a burger, an In-N-Out burger bag. The guy looked at him, and he just called him. What did he call him? He said, you are... Oh my gosh. I can't even remember what he called him, but it was a horrible name and something pedophile for eating an In-N-Out burger. I couldn't believe it. I said, "Are you serious?" And he says, "Yeah." And I said, "It's a good thing you're a good Christian." I said, because if he would have said that to me, I would have asked him to step outside. And I said, "You need to go and act like a man and go have a conversation with him." But he just let it go. And I'm just like, oh my God, how does that happen in a class? And how does that guy not get fired?
Exactly.
Well, guys, we've been over an hour at this point. The time goes quickly. We were having fun and everything. I do want to say that this is only the beginning. We're working towards understanding political Islam and all the factors that go into that. This particular book, it's a textbook, Rutledge textbook, and they have a couple more from Rutledge, as well as a primary source, the original text that seems to be major influence on the radical Islam around the world. There's so much to learn in this, and it's going to take us a while. So we just have to have patience, kind of pick at it a little each day, and together I'm hoping that we can develop our reading comprehension skills and our conversational abilities, those kinds of things. And that's going to enable us to hopefully have an intelligent conversation with our adversaries and explain to them calmly, coolly, collected, this is why you're wrong, and this is what is really going on. And why don't you try a different approach? Because it might make the world a better place.
The Corona Leo, she's got a message here. Her Discord isn't working, so she can't talk. But she says, everybody gets a trophy, 17th place.
So yeah, this is, and even this, all this stuff that we're going to talk about, political Islam. There's also, we also need to look at the communist China and what things are going on there, and we have to look at the Frankfurt School and the postmodernists and stuff. There's so much stuff for us to cover, and we have not been given that in our school. School does not teach us the kinds of things that we need to know in order to survive what the Kabbalah has done to us, and we're going to have to digest this stuff just to recover. To recover from. We have to understand what happened to us. Even if we do win, we're still going to need to digest this experience, figure out what just happened. Why did it happen? So we're on it. So
we learn from it and don't do it again.
Well, hopefully. For me, it's kind of like just trying to recover from a collective trauma that we've all been experiencing.
Yeah.
It's like
a bad drunk.
Woke up from a coma and we're in charge of the United States, looking around at the world and thinking, what happened? Trying to make it right.
Yeah.
Oh, exactly. That's a really good analogy.
But I think,
and I know some of the stuff we're going to cover might seem dry to some people out there, but if you just take the time for it, I think that it will edify you enough to open your eyes.
And I think it is one of those things you get used to it little by little, and you come to enjoy it, and you'll start having fun, more and more fun. You'll say, wow, that's really fascinating. And it'll be actually much more fun than watching TV. It'll be much more fun than probably a lot of other things that you currently enjoy.
Doubtful.
Well, I'm going to try to convert you.
Well,
this kind of feels like it might have been the radio era where you're sitting around staring at the screen and listening, and it's a quiet place, no commercials.
Yeah, it's a time to slow down, pace yourself, and
clean
that's
your stove.
Yeah, and so it's and that's one of the things that you have to learn, the self-discipline. The self-discipline is about finding patience. It's just you can't rush through it and expect to find any real understanding. You have to. It takes time to digest it. Expose yourself a little, digest a little.
Oh, sorry. Are you finished?
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
I was just going to say, if we're wrapping up, I just wanted to make sure that people know that we've got the meme section. We've been uploading more memes. Go over there, grab those, circulate them.
Right.
Yeah, that's the CorsiNation.com, people. The CorsiNation.com, right?
Do it.
I also put the link to this book that we're reading for Amazon in the chat, so that you can go, if you want it, you can buy it. The one that I have there is the Kindle link. But if you want to buy it, there it is. It looks like the hardback, the hardcover is cheaper. Just an FYI. So
please do share this with your friends, but not your enemies, because we're not ready for them yet. We'll get to them. But, we have to learn what our enemy's up to. We have to figure out what they're thinking, and we just have to prepare ourselves.
Thanks for coming into the tree tonight.
Tree? What tree is that?
Yes, our squirrel tree.
Oh, I must have missed that conversation.
Boss. Just don't take my nuts, dang it.
These nuts?
Yes,
we're hoarders, man.
Put it down, dang it. Don't make me smack you.
Bofa? Did you say Bofa?
You broke up.
Did you say Bofa?
What happened to the army wife?
Her Discord broke.
Her Discord is broken.
Oh.
Come on, guys.
I thought she was out there getting some nuts.
She probably is.
She probably is.
Yeah.
Bring them back to us. She always brings us the best stuff.
Winter's right around the corner.
Yeah, be prepared.
I'm going to go and
prepper.
Yeah, be careful. There's some haunted nuts coming pretty quick.
So we are the Secret Squirrels. Goodbye.
We are the Secret Squirrels.